Have you ever heard of a king who called himself God Manifest? It sounds like something out of a fantasy movie, but this was a real ruler in ancient history. His name was Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and his story is a wild ride of ambition, culture clashes, and a legacy that still echoes today. So, grab your popcorn, and let's dive into the world of the Seleucid Empire and its most infamous king. Our story begins in the 2nd century BCE. The massive empire forged by Alexander the Great had been split among his generals. One of the largest chunks was the Seleucid Empire, a sprawling kingdom that covered much of the Middle East and Central Asia. It was a true melting pot of cultures, languages, and religions, from Persians and Babylonians to Greeks and Jews. Ruling over this diverse realm was no easy task, and that's where Antiochus IV enters the picture. Antiochus wasn't actually supposed to be king. He spent years as a political hostage in Rome, where he got a first-hand look at Roman power and culture. When his brother, the king, was assassinated, Antiochus saw his chance. Through some clever political maneuvering, he seized the throne in 175 BCE now. Being a king of a vast, multicultural empire presents a huge challenge. How do you keep it all together? Antiochus had an idea, a grand vision he believed would unify his kingdom and make it strong enough to stand up to the rising power of Rome. His plan had a name: Hellenization. So, what exactly was Hellenization? Simply put, it was the spread of Greek culture. Antiochus wanted everyone in his empire, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the mountains of modern-day Afghanistan, to adopt Greek language, customs, art, philosophy, and most importantly, Greek religion. He saw Greek culture as superior and believed that if everyone shared the same cultural identity, his empire would be more stable and powerful. He even gave himself the nickname Epiphanes, which means God Manifest, basically declaring himself a divine figure, a common practice for Hellenistic kings, but a bold statement nonetheless. To push his Hellenization policy, Antiochus started building Greek-style cities, or palaeus, complete with theaters, temples, and gymnasiums, the ancient equivalent of a community sports center. He encouraged the use of the Greek language for government and trade, and minted coins with his own image portrayed as a Greek god, like Zeus. For many people in his empire, this wasn't a huge deal. They had been living with Greek influence for generations and were happy to adopt some new customs, especially if it helped them get ahead in business or politics. But for one group, this policy was about to spark a massive conflict. In the small but significant region of Judea, the Jewish people had a unique and deeply held monotheistic faith. Their entire way of life was built around the laws and traditions of their one God. For them, Hellenization wasn't just a cultural suggestion. It was a direct attack on their identity and their covenant with God. The idea of worshipping Greek gods, especially a king who called himself one, was completely unacceptable. Tensions began to simmer. Some urban, elite Jews were open to Hellenism, but for the vast majority, it was a red line. The situation exploded when Antiochus, facing financial troubles and needing to assert his authority, went a step too far. He marched into Jerusalem, looted the sacred Second Temple, and in a move that would go down in history as an ultimate act of desecration, he set up an altar to Zeus inside it. He forbade Jewish religious practices like circumcision and observing the Sabbath, and he ordered them to sacrifice to the Greek gods. This was the final straw. What followed was a full-blown rebellion, the Maccabean Revolt, led by Judah Maccabee and his family. This bloody and desperate struggle is the story behind the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah. Antiochus IV Epiphanes' reign shows us the explosive consequences of forced cultural assimilation. His ambition to create a unified Hellenized empire ultimately backfired, leading to rebellion and cementing his reputation as a villain in the history of the Jewish people. His story is a powerful reminder that identity and faith are forces that cooee and simply be erased by a king's decree. What do you think? Was Antiochus a visionary leader? Have you ever wondered what held a society together for thousands of years, even when scattered across the globe? For the ancient Jewish people, the answer wasn't just about land or a king. It was a powerful, intricate web of faith, law, and family that formed the very essence of their existence. Let's dive into the heart of this ancient world and see what made it tick. At the absolute center of everything was faith. This wasn't just a once-a-week affair. It was the air they breathed. Their relationship with God was personal, immediate, and it informed every single aspect of their lives. From the moment they woke up to the moment they slept, their actions were guided by a covenant, a sacred promise they believed their ancestors had made. This faith gave them a profound sense of purpose and identity. It told them who they were, where they came from, and what their ultimate destiny was. This shared belief was the unbreakable thread that connected every man, woman, and child. But faith needs a framework to be lived out daily, and that's where the law came in. The Torah wasn't just a book of stories. It was a comprehensive guide to life. It covered everything from major moral principles, like justice and compassion, to the specifics of diet, hygiene, and business ethics. These religious laws, known as halakha, weren't seen as burdensome restrictions. Instead, they were viewed as a divine gift, a pathway to living a holy and righteous life. Following these laws was a way of honoring their covenant with God and bringing a piece of the sacred into the everyday, mundane world. It structured their society and ensured a shared standard of behavior and values. And then there was the family, the foundational building block of the entire community. Marriage wasn't just a romantic union. It was considered a sacred duty, essential for the continuation of the Jewish people and their traditions. The home was the first temple, the first school. It was within the family that children learned the stories, the prayers, and the laws. Traditions were passed down from grandparent to child, not just through words, but through shared experiences. Think of the weekly Shabbat dinner, a time to rest and reconnect, or the annual Passover seder, where the story of their liberation was retold and relived. These rituals weren't just customs, they were powerful acts of memory and identity, weaving the past into the present and ensuring it would live on into the future. These three pillars, faith, law, and family, were so deeply intertwined that you couldn't separate one from the other. Their faith gave meaning to the law. The law provided structure for their faith, and the family was the vessel that carried both forward through time. This powerful combination created an incredibly resilient and unified community. Their identity wasn't tied to a physical temple made of stone, but to a living temple built of shared beliefs, practices, and strong family bonds. Because this framework was so fundamental to their survival and identity, any threat to it was perceived as an existential crisis, an attack on their traditions, a challenge to their laws, or a disruption to their family life wasn't just a minor issue. It was seen as an assault on the very soul of their people. It was a threat to their connection with God and to their entire reason for being. This deep-seated need to protect their way of life explains so much of their history, their resilience, and their enduring legacy. It's a powerful lesson in how culture and community can be the... Imagine living in a world where everything you believe in, every tradition you hold dear, is suddenly declared illegal. Your holidays, your rituals, your very way of life are banned overnight. This isn't some dystopian novel. This was the harsh reality for the Jewish people in the 2nd century BCE. Under the rule of a king named Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Let's set the stage. The land of Judea, the heart of Jewish life, was caught in a massive tug-of-war between two powerful successor kingdoms of Alexander the Great, the Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria. For a long time, Judea was under the relatively tolerant rule of the Ptolemies. But around 200 BCE, the Seleucids, led by Antiochus III, conquered the region. Initially, things didn't change much. The Jewish people were allowed to maintain their religious freedoms and govern their own internal affairs. But then, his son, Antiochus IV, come into power. He wasn't like his father. He called himself Epiphanes, which means God manifest, a clear sign of his immense ego. He was ambitious, and he had a grand vision to unite his diverse empire under a single, unified Greek culture, a process we now call Hellenization. And for him, the unique, monotheistic culture of the Jews was a major roadblock. Antiochus saw Jewish customs as strange and stubborn. He couldn't understand why they would unjust assimilate and adopt the superior Greek way of life. His patience wore thin, especially after a failed invasion of Egypt left him humiliated and in need of cash. He looked at the wealthy temple in Jerusalem and saw a solution to his financial problems and a target for his cultural campaign. So, the hammer fell. In a series of escalating decrees around 167 BCE, Antiochus launched a full-scale assault on Judaism. He banned the observance of the Sabbath, a cornerstone of Jewish life. Can you imagine a week without a weekend? A day of rest commanded by your faith, now a crime? He outlawed circumcision, the ancient sign of the covenant. He forbade the study of the Torah, the sacred text that guided every aspect of their lives. Jewish holidays were prohibited. Possessing a scroll of the Torah became a capital offense. It was a systematic attempt to erase an entire culture from existence. He didn't just ban these practices. He forced Greek customs upon the population. He ordered gymnasiums to be built, where Greek ideals of the body were celebrated, often in stark contrast to Jewish modesty. He pressured people to eat pork, which is strictly forbidden in Judaism, as a test of loyalty to him and a rejection of their own faith. Many refused and faced brutal consequences. The stories from this period are filled with accounts of martyrs who chose death over betraying their beliefs. But the most shocking act, the one that broke the camel's back, was the desecration of the Second Temple in Jerusalem. This wasn't just a building. It was the holiest site in Judaism, the dwelling place of God on earth. Antiochus marched his troops into this sacred space. He plundered its treasures, but he didn't stop there. In an act of ultimate blasphemy, he erected an altar to the Greek god Zeus inside the temple. And on this altar, he sacrificed a pig, an animal considered ritually unclean in Judaism. This was the point of no return. It was an unimaginable defilement. He didn't just impose foreign rule. He attacked the very soul of the Jewish people. He took their most sacred space and deliberately violated it in the most offensive way possible. This act, known as the Abomination of Desolation, sent shockwaves through the community. For many, this was the final straw. Compromise was no longer an option. How could you coexist with a ruler who declared war on your God? The choice became clear: either abandon their faith entirely or fight back. It was in this crucible of persecution, with their culture on the brink of annihilation, that the seeds of rebellion were sown. The actions of Antiochus didn't destroy Judaism. They ignited a fire, sparking a desperate, heroic revolt led by a family known as the Maccabees, a fight for freedom, for faith, and for the very survival of their identity. And that's a story for another time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the mysteries of the past. Today, we're tackling a really sensitive and controversial topic from ancient history, one that still sparks intense debate among scholars. It's a story about power, oppression, and the struggle for dignity, centered around the infamous ruler, Antiochus IV. Epiphanes. You've probably heard of him in the context of the Hanukkah story. But there's a darker, more disturbing layer to his legacy that we need to unpack. So, let's set the scene. We're in the 2nd century BCE, in Judea, under the rule of the Seleucid Empire. Antiochus is on the throne, and he's not exactly known for his cultural sensitivity. He's pushing a policy of trying to make everyone in his vast empire adopt Greek culture, religion, and customs. For the Jewish people, this was a direct assault on their identity and their covenant with God. This tension is the backdrop for the Maccabean revolt, a story of incredible courage and faith. But within this larger conflict, some later ancient writings tell a particularly shocking story. These texts claim that Antiochus instituted a brutal and humiliating decree aimed directly at Jewish families. According to these sources, he ordered that every Jewish bride, on her wedding night, had to be brought to the local Greek governor or military commander before she could be with her new husband. This alleged practice is often referred to by the Latin term jus primae noctis, or the rite of the first night. Imagine the horror and degradation of such a policy. A wedding, a moment that should be filled with joy, celebration, and the sacred beginning of a new family, would instead be marked by trauma and dishonor. The goal wouldn't just be physical violation. It would be a calculated act of psychological warfare. It was designed to break the spirit of the people, to shame the men who couldn't protect their wives, and to shatter the sanctity of the Jewish family, which was the very cornerstone of their society. It was a message of absolute dominance. Your bodies, your families, your most sacred traditions belong to us. These accounts, found in texts written centuries after the events, paint Antiochus as a monster, a tyrant, whose cruelty knew no bounds. They serve as powerful propaganda, illustrating exactly why the Maccabean revolt was so necessary. The story became a rallying cry, a symbol of the ultimate defilement that the Jewish people were fighting against. It transformed the conflict from a political struggle into a holy war for the very soul of the nation. It's an incredibly powerful and emotive narrative. But here's where things get complicated for us as historians. Is this story literally true? This is the million-dollar question that scholars are still wrestling with. When we look for contemporary evidence from the time of Antiochus himself, we find nothing. There are no official records, no decrees, no letters from that period that mention this specific policy. The books of Maccabees, our primary sources for the revolt, detail many of Antiochus's other atrocities, desecrating the temple, banning circumcision, forcing people to eat pork, but they are silent on this particular issue of the first night. This lack of contemporary evidence is a huge red flag for historians. It leads to a few possible interpretations. The first possibility is that it was a real, unwritten policy, enforced locally by brutal commanders, but never officially documented. This is possible, as occupiers throughout history have often committed horrific acts that never made it into the official records. The trauma and shame might have been so great that people didn't speak or write about it openly at the time. A second, more likely possibility is that the story is symbolic. It might not have been a literal, empire-wide law, but a powerful metaphor for the rape of the Jewish nation by the foreign, Hellenistic culture. In this view, Antiochus's attempt to force Greek ways upon Judea was seen as a violation of the nation's integrity, and the story of the bride was a vivid allegorical way to express that feeling of defilement and dishonor. It captures the emotional truth of the experience of being colonized and oppressed, even if it's not a literal account of events. The third possibility is that the story is a later exaggeration, or even a complete invention. It could have been created by later writers, hundreds of years after the fact, to make the villainy of Antiochus even more extreme and the heroism of the Maccabees even more glorious. In the ancient world, it was common practice to embellish stories about hated tyrants to make a moral point. By adding this layer of sexual violence, later storytellers could ensure that future generations would understand the absolute evil they were up against. So, where does that leave us? We're faced with a chilling story of oppression that powerfully captures the horrors of Antiochus's reign, but we lack the hard evidence to confirm it as historical fact. We have to weigh the power of the narrative against the silence of the contemporary sources. Does it matter if it was literal or symbolic? In one sense, it absolutely does. But in another, the story as endurance tells us something vital about the memory of trauma and the fight for cultural survival. It shows how communities use stories to make sense of their suffering and to celebrate their resistance. Whether it was a literal policy, a powerful symbol, or a later legend, this account reveals the profound depth of the wound that Antiochus inflicted on the Jewish people. It is a stark reminder of how rulers can use humiliation as a weapon of war, and why the fight for dignity. Ever wondered how vast empires, outnumbered by the populations they ruled, managed to maintain control for centuries? It wasn't always through brute force, iron chains, or towering walls. Often, the most effective weapon was invisible, silent, and aimed directly at the human spirit. It was the weapon of humiliation. Throughout history, the smartest and most ruthless rulers understood a profound psychological truth. If you can break a person's dignity, you can break their will to resist. When an individual or an entire community is subjected to constant shame and degradation, a sense of powerlessness takes root. It's a feeling that you are inherently less than your oppressor, that your very identity is flawed. This isn't just about feeling bad. It's a deep, corrosive attack on your sense of self-worth. Think about it. A physical wound can heal. A prison sentence has an end, but the scar left by humiliation can last a lifetime, passed down through generations. This is why targeting family honor has always been such a devastating tactic. An attack on a family's name, its elders, or its traditions isn't just an insult to a few people. It's a strike at the very heart of a community's social fabric. Our families and close-knit groups are where we find our strength, our trust, and our courage. They are the first line of defense, the private space where we can speak freely and plan our resistance. When an empire successfully dishonors a family, it shatters that trust. Neighbors begin to suspect neighbors. Children might resent parents who they feel failed to protect the family's honor. The unity that once provided a shield against oppression begins to crack from within. This creates a pervasive atmosphere of fear. People become afraid to speak up, not just for fear of physical punishment, but for fear of bringing further shame upon their loved ones. They learn to stay silent, to keep their heads down, to accept the unacceptable. This silence is exactly what the rulers want. A silent, divided population is a manageable population. It's a community that has been psychologically disarmed. Look at the Roman Empire, for instance. While their legions were formidable, a huge part of their control strategy involved psychological dominance. Through public triumphs where defeated kings were paraded in chains, and by imposing their own culture as superior, they constantly reminded conquered peoples of their subordinate status. It was a clear message. We are the civilized. You are the barbarians. Your ways are worthless. This constant psychological pressure was often more effective than an army at preventing rebellions before they even started. The same pattern appears again and again across different cultures and eras. Colonizers would often belittle the traditions, languages, and religions of the people they ruled. They would install puppet leaders who were forced to enforce humiliating policies against their own people, creating deep-seated resentment and division. The goal was always the same: to break the spirit of resistance by attacking the sources of pride and unity. It's a strategy designed to make people feel isolated and powerless. Understanding this dark aspect of history is crucial. It shows us that the battle for freedom is not just fought on the battlefield. It is also fought in the mind. Preserving dignity, honoring our heritage, and maintaining unity within our communities are not just feel-good ideas. They are acts of defiance. They are the essential armor that protects our spirit against those who would seek to dominate us. The most powerful resistance begins when people refuse to be ashamed, stand together, and have you ever noticed that a scary story spreads like wildfire? While good news sometimes takes its sweet time, it's a strange part of how our minds work. But when that fear isn't just a story, when it's real and close to home, it does more than just spread. It changes everything. It's a topic we don't discuss enough. So today, let's talk about the invisible scars left behind by fear and violence. Fear has a powerful ripple effect. It begins with an event, but it doesn't end there. It travels from person to person, family to family, until an entire community feels its chill. Think about it. When you hear about something unsettling happening nearby, what's your first instinct? You probably check your locks, call your loved ones, and feel a little knot of anxiety in your stomach. That knot is fear taking root. For families, this is especially tough. A home is supposed to be a sanctuary, the one place in the world where you can let your guard down and feel completely safe. But when fear creeps in, that feeling of security shatters. Parents become more anxious, constantly worrying about their children's safety. Simply things like letting them play outside or walk to a friend's house suddenly feel like huge risks. This constant state of alert is exhausting. It strains relationships and replaces the warmth of a loving home with a quiet, persistent. Everyone is on edge, and the comfort of home starts to feel more like a fortress. This breakdown of safety leads to a breakdown of something even more fundamental: trust. We start looking at our neighbors with suspicion. Strangers on the street become potential threats. The social fabric that holds a community together begins to unravel. We stop talking to each other. We stop helping each other. And we retreat into our own isolated bubbles. That sense of belonging, of being part of something bigger than ourselves, is one of the first casualties. And when that's gone, people start to lose hope. They lose confidence in their leaders, in their neighbors, and ultimately, in the future of their own community. Now, let's talk about the wounds themselves. When we think of violence, we often picture the physical injuries, the cuts, the bruises, and those are terrible, of course. But there's another kind of injury, one that you can't see and that doesn't heal with time and a bandage. These are the emotional and psychological wounds. Fear, anxiety, trauma. These things can linger for years, even a lifetime. They can change a person's personality, making them more withdrawn, irritable, or jumpy. They can lead to sleepless nights, nightmares, and a constant feeling of dread. These emotional wounds are often deeper and last far longer than any physical ones. A broken bone will mend, but a broken sense of safety is much harder to repair. This is especially true for children, whose developing minds are incredibly sensitive to their environment. Growing up in a climate of fear can have a lasting impact on their ability to trust others, to form healthy relationships, and to feel secure in the world. It's a heavy burden for anyone to carry, let alone a child. So, what can we do? It might feel overwhelming, but the solution starts small. It starts with reconnecting. It starts with checking in on a neighbor, smiling at a stranger, or organizing a simple community get. It's about consciously choosing to build bridges instead of walls. When we strengthen our community bonds, we create a network of support that fear can't easily break. We remind ourselves that we are in this together. It's also about speaking up and seeking help. There is no shame in admitting that you're scared or struggling. Talking about these feelings with friends, family, or a professional can make a world of difference. When we share our burdens, they become lighter. And by encouraging open conversations about mental health, we create a culture where it's okay to not be okay, and where help is readily available. Rebuilding trust and hope is a marathon, not a sprint. But every act of kindness, every conversation, every hand reached out in support is a step in the right direction. It's how we start to heal the invisible wounds and reclaim. Have you ever wondered about the story behind Hanukkah? It's more than just a festival of lights. It's a powerful tale of courage, faith, and the fight for freedom. Let's travel back in time, over 2,000 years ago, to the land of Judea, which we now know as Israel. Back then, it was under the rule of the Seleucid Empire, a Greek-Syrian kingdom. Life for the Jewish people was about to change dramatically. The story really gets going with a king named Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Now, this king had a grand vision. He wanted his entire empire to be unified under Greek culture, a process called He wanted everyone to worship Greek gods, speak the Greek language, and adopt Greek customs. For many people in his empire, this wasn't a huge deal. But for the Jewish people, it was a direct threat to their very identity. Their faith, with its single, invisible God and its unique traditions, like observing the Sabbath and dietary laws, was the core of their existence. At first, Antiochus's policies were subtle. Greek gymnasiums were built in Jerusalem, and Greek philosophy was encouraged. Some Jewish people even embraced this new culture. But then, things took a much darker turn. Antiochus decided to force Hellenization upon everyone. He outlawed Jewish religious practices. Studying the Torah, observing the Sabbath, and circumcising newborn sons were all banned, punishable by death. He was trying to erase an entire way of life. The ultimate act of desecration came when Antiochus' soldiers marched into the heart of Jewish life. The Second Temple in Jerusalem. This was the holiest place for the Jewish people. The soldiers erected a statue of the Greek god Zeus inside, and sacrificed pigs on the altar, an animal considered unclean in Jewish law. The temple was defiled. It was a profound spiritual blow, a moment of deep despair and outrage for the entire community. Imagine your most sacred place being violated in such a way. It felt like the light of their faith was being extinguished. But even in the darkest of times, sparks of resistance can ignite a fire. And that's exactly what happened. The people had been pushed too far. In a small town called Modin, an elderly priest named Mattathias was ordered by a Syrian Greek official to make a sacrifice to a Greek god. He refused. When another Jewish person stepped forward to obey the order, Mattathias, filled with righteous anger, took a stand. This single act of defiance was the spark that lit the flame of rebellion. Mattathias and his 5 sons fled to the hills of Judea. One of his sons, Judah, would soon become the leader of this new resistance. Judah was a brilliant military strategist, and he earned a nickname, the Hammer, or in Hebrew, Maccabi. And so, the small band of rebels became known as the Maccabees. They were not a trained army. They were farmers, scholars, and ordinary people who were willing to fight for their right to practice their faith. They were incredibly outnumbered and outmatched. The Seleucid army was one of the most powerful military forces of its time, with well-equipped soldiers, cavalry, and even war elephants. The Maccabees, on the other hand, relied on guerrilla warfare. They knew the terrain, the hills, and the caves of Judea. They used surprise attacks, ambushes, and their deep knowledge of the land to their advantage. They fought not for conquest or for glory, but for their homes, their families, and their God. Against all odds, battle after battle, the Maccabees began to win. Their victories were seen as nothing short of miraculous. They inspired more and more people to join their cause. Their struggle was long and difficult, but their determination never wavered. Finally, After 3 long years of fighting, they achieved their goal. They drove the Seleucid forces out of Jerusalem and triumphantly reclaimed their sacred temple. When they entered the temple, they found it in ruins, desecrated and desolate. Their first task was to cleanse and rededicate it to God. They cleared out the Greek idols and rebuilt the altar. But when it came time to relight the menorah, the 7-branched candelabrum that was meant to burn continuously, they faced a problem. They could only find 1 small cruse of sanctified oil, enough to last for just 1 day. And here is where the miracle of Hanukkah takes place. According to the tradition, that 1 day supply of oil burned for 8 full days. It was just enough time for them to prepare new, pure oil. This miracle of the oil, along with the incredible military victory, is what Hanukkah commemorates. It symbolizes the triumph of light over darkness, of faith over oppression, and of a small group of determined people against a mighty empire. So, every year, when Jewish families light the Hanukkah menorah, they are not just lighting candles. They are reliving this incredible story. They add 1 candle each night for 8 nights, remembering the miracle and the bravery of the Maccabees. It's a celebration of religious freedom and a reminder that even when things seem hopeless, faith and courage can create miracles. It's a beautiful story of resilience that continues to inspire people all over the world. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from history.